Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching how the Ottomans took over Western Anatolia by kings and generals. Now this is part 2 of their series, The Rise of the Ottoman Empire. We reacted to part 1 quite a while ago, so if you need a refresher, I will link part 1 in the description down below. A lot of you guys have been requesting part 2 of the series, and it's been a while since we did any Ottoman or Eastern Roman history. We've been pretty focused on modern history lately, so I'm excited to get into it. Just a reminder, essentially in episode 1, we saw the emergence of the early Ottoman Empire under Osman Gazi from the Sultanate of Rum, which had already conquered a lot of the Byzantine Empire's territory in Anatolia in particular. Now, before we get into this one, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. With all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction.
In our last episode on the history of the Ottoman Empire, we covered the origins of the House of Osman and the establishment of the Ottoman Beylik on territory won at the expense of the declining Byzantine Empire. However, this was far from the end of Osmanli ambitions. In this episode, we will look at how Osman Gazi and his successors transitioned the Ottoman state from being a minor Turkic statelet on the outskirts of Anatolia to a major up-and-coming regional power poised to dominate its neighbors.
Yeah, well, essentially last time we saw the decline of the Eastern Roman Empire. We're talking like mostly post-year 1000, though of course it had already been in decline. The expansion of the Seljuk Turks into their territory, the Sultanate of Rum, which was essentially the Seljuk state in Anatolia mostly, and then the emergence of the early Ottoman Empire, along with a whole bunch of sort of Turkic states in the region. Now, of course, we know that the Ottomans will become the dominant power in the region, but they've still got a long way to go until that actually happens.
For us, it's not empires we want to build, but our own world. Digitally, that is. Everyone has a...
And we'll watch through the ad because we want to support kings and generals, all the excellent videos they make. So I'll link their video down below. You guys should go check it out, give them a like, subscribe, and check out their ad if it's still active. I think this video is a little old at this point, but, you know, we want to show them some support because we enjoy their content. So I'll let the ad play through.
The best part of all, building your world and deciding what people can do in it. You've probably had ideas for great games countless times, but it's one medium that takes extreme dedication.
Yeah, there's a big gap between a good
world.
idea and a
Now,
good game.
take your idea and see it realized in Yahaha right away. It even stores the assets themselves on cloud servers, so you don't clog up your computer with the development process. And when you have something to show the world, you can one-click publish it to the Yahaha network, a cross-platform service that lets PC and mobile users discover and play your games. That of course means that you can also go in and check out worlds people have already made for inspiration or just some easy multiplayer fun. You can invite your friends to hang out or meet new ones at any time in Yahaha's 3D spaces and communities. So give that game you've always been thinking about a chance to become real. You can get in on this for free right now by joining the Early Access program. Just use our link in the description.
Alright, there you go.
After securing victories at the battles
Back to the Ottomans.
of Bafeus and Dimbos, the Ottoman state under Osman Gazi was poised to follow up their successes with the eventual conquest of Byzantine Bithynia. Within only 2 decades, the Ottoman Beylik had transformed from a tiny territorial pocket of 2 minor villages to a realm of a few dozen towns and major castles. This swift acquisition...
I mean, it's already grown quite a bit, but from this map you can see this is not the Ottoman Empire as it will be at its height. This is a very small Ottoman Empire surrounded by other regional powers, other more influential regional powers. Though, you know, it's in a pretty nice spot for expansion. We saw it sort of right on the edge of Nicaea. That's a pretty important city in the Byzantine sort of Christian world. So, you know, maybe some nice positioning, but it is one of many at this point, and, it's not inevitable that it will become this great regional power. Nothing is truly inevitable in history, right? Many other things could have happened, but, of course, in these videos, we'll see how history did go that way, how it did become the major power of the region. Not only eclipsing its other sort of Turkic and Muslim rivals, but of course eclipsing the Eastern Roman Empire.
Land from the Byzantines would result in a steady migration of Turkic peoples from central Anatolia into the Ottoman Beylik, bolstering Osman's military and economic capacities to wage wars against his infidel neighbors up north. Further Turkic migration into Ottoman lands would increase in scale during the first decade of the 14th century, as the Sultanate of Rum would collapse after years of internal struggles, leaving central Anatolia in a state of social and political unrest between the newly established beyliks in the region. Meanwhile, with the last of his Anatolian holdings at risk of falling to the various Muslim powers of the region after the battles of Bophaeus and Dimbos, Andronikos II began searching for outside help to...
Yeah, I mean, for the Byzantines, or the Eastern Roman Empire, I use the terms interchangeably. I know the term Byzantine is a bit of an anachronism, right? It wasn't used at the time, but for the sake of clarity, I'm okay with using it. I know some people aren't, but to be clear, the Byzantine Empire is the Eastern Roman Empire. Anyway, the center of the empire was Constantinople. That would always be the case. But Anatolia was had been one of the centers of the Byzantine Empire, right? You sort of have, the Balkans, or at least the southern chunk of the Balkans, Constantinople, and Anatolia. These were like the heartlands of the Byzantine Empire. But for a while now, their Anatolian territory had been progressively eaten away by the Seljuks. It had become the Sultanate of Rum, and even though that has broken up, you can see they do not hold much territory in Anatolia anymore. They're threatened from their east. Of course, in the Balkans, they're also threatened from the north, particularly by Bulgaria and some of these other states, and they're also threatened from the west. They're threatened by some of these emerging Italian states that are making a lot of money off of trade. So the Byzantine Empire, it's really facing problems from sort of every direction.
To fend off the Turkic incursions into his lands, the Roman Emperor would first send letters to Mahmud Ghazan of the Ilkhanate, in the hopes of convincing the Mongol ruler to reassert Mongol power in Anatolia after the fall of the Sultanate of Rum. However, with the major Mongol defeat against the Mamluks during the Battle of Marj al-Safar, and the further decentralization of Mongol domains in the Middle East, talks between the Byzantines and the Ilkhanate failed to achieve any results.
As with all big empires, we saw the Sultanate of Rum broke up. Mongol power has also been, and is sort of breaking up, becoming more decentralized. A lot of this territory, once controlled by one big empire, is now splitting up into these different smaller states and empires, some of which are still quite powerful. The Byzantines still hold a pretty impressive degree of power. The different Mongol states are still powerful. We have the Mamelukes down in Egypt, but there is a lot of decentralization at this point. Of course, over time, it will re-centralize, then break up. Sort of the cycle of these things.
Andronikos II would then turn to the Great Catalan Company, a mercenary group from Western Europe, famous for their military exploits in the hilly ranges of Spain and Sicily. Accepting the call for help, the 8,000-strong Catalan Company would arrive in Constantinople at the start of 1303. In an act to bolster morale and loyalty amongst the Catalans, the Italian commander of the mercenary group, Roger de Flor, would be given the coveted imperial title of Megas Dux, and would be promised the emperor's niece in the hopes for a successful military campaign. However, the Catalan...
Just a reminder right there of how cosmopolitan this world is. Sometimes we think of, we're in the Middle Ages at this point. We think of it as sort of a divided and isolated world, which in some ways it was. It was also very cosmopolitan. You can just look at all the different peoples and cultures in this map alone. We've got the Italians involved, Catalans, people from the Western Europe, the Iberian Peninsula, and beyond. Of course, in this time period, we'll have a lot of different Europeans involved in Byzantine business. So there's a lot of people sort of closing in on this region from a lot of different places.
Plans would also prove ineffective for the Byzantine Empire, as the mercenary company, instead of focusing on reconquering Byzantine lands in western Anatolia, indiscriminately plundered the peoples of the countryside, regardless of their religious affiliation, for their own gain.
Yeah, that's sort of the risk of hiring a mercenary company, especially one you don't trust very well, is that they'll just come in and work for their own benefit instead of doing what you wanted them to.
Alienating the remaining Christian population in the region from Byzantine rule. Gaining nothing from his expensive gamble to retake his Anatolian holdings, Andronikos II, in a disastrous move, would murder Roger de Flor during a banquet, which would result in a bloody 2-year war between imperial forces and the Catalans in Thrace.
Not what you need.
While the Catalans had been marauding in western Anatolia, the Ottomans were forced to withdraw from their blockades of Prusa and Nicaea. But now that the Latin mercenaries had turned upon their former employers, Osman Gazi could resume conducting major raids into Byzantine Bithynia.
And, I mean, just look, I was saying about the position of the early Ottoman Empire, because this is the Ottoman Empire sort of just founded right in the heart of sort of western Anatolia, and they're in proximity to some, historically important cities. Now, some of these cities weren't so important anymore, but you can look at, Nicomedia, Nicaea, and of course, Constantinople just up there. You can start, when we look at the expansion of the Ottoman Empire, a lot of Turkic or Muslim empires sort of started expanding more through the Middle East and then further. But if we look at the Ottoman Empire, their center of power was always around Constantinople, around Western Anatolia. And of course, they would go westwards and northwards into the Balkans, and then they would expand, southwards and eastwards through the Middle East. But their center of power was always in this area because this is where the Ottoman Empire started.
During this period, the towns of Hamankia, Geve, Mudanya, Andranos, Yalova, and Akyezi were slowly incorporated into the Ottoman Beylik, cutting the Byzantines off from their key cities of Prusa and Nicaea. It was also during this period in which Byzantine imperial authority in western Anatolia became non-existent, as local Turkic beyliks in the region began annexing such Byzantine towns as Ephesus in 1308, Smyrna in 1310, and Magnesia in 1313. Only the town of Philadelphia would remain in Byzantine.
Philadelphia based. But if you don't know, I'm from the Philadelphia in the United States, so shout out to the city of brotherly love, both of them.
Hands, as the rest of western Anatolia would swiftly fall into Muslim rule. As a result of the rapid disintegration of Byzantine power in Anatolia and the inept rule of Andronikos II, during the year 1321, a new round of Byzantine civil wars would erupt between the emperor and his usurper grandson Andronikos III. Wanting to take advantage of Byzantine civil unrest, the now 60-year-old Osman began his final preparations for his long-awaited siege on Prusa. Lacking the siege equipment to seize the city, Osman would instead order the construction of 2 major forts around Prusa to oversee the city's blockade. Upon the construction of the forts, a 10,000-strong Ottoman garrison, led by Osman's son, Orhan Gazi, was installed, thus cutting off Prusa from the rest of the world. As the Byzantine civil war raged on in Thrace between members of the Palaiologos dynasty, Prusa was left at the mercy of Osman and his armies.
Sort of a classic Byzantine moment, by the way. You're surrounded by enemies on all sides, and you yourselves have fallen into civil war, infighting. It's just, like I said, classic Byzantine moment. They were, frankly, often besieged by enemies on many sides, and yet there was a whole lot of infighting that occurred within the Eastern Roman Empire. At times, they really were their own worst enemies.
After many years of withstanding the Ottoman army at his gates, on April 6th of 1326, the governor of Prusa would officially surrender the city to Orhan after seeing that no reinforcements from Constantinople were coming to their aid.
Yeah.
The city of Prusa would be the first major walled city to come under Ottoman rule, effectively doubling the wealth and population of the Beylik overnight.
Yeah, and this is, we're talking about this empire or this Ottoman state that has emerged out of the Sultanate of Rum, the Seljuk Turks. Originally these are a sort of nomadic Turkic people. Their style of warfare very much revolved around this cavalry horse archer style, but they're now conquering sedentary territory, and the Ottoman Empire, it sounds a little grand at this point, but what will become the Ottoman Empire, of course, is sort of slowly, or maybe quickly, becoming a sort of grand sedentary empire rather than a sort of nomadic group of people.
However, the first leader of the Ottomans would not live to see the conquest of Prusa, as he would die shortly before the conclusion of the siege. Osman Gazi, who had fought the Byzantines for more than 40 years and won countless victories for his Beylik, only left a horse, a couple of oxen, and a few flocks of sheep to his name. Unlike other Turkic warlords who hoarded their wealth, Osman Gazi, according to traditional chronicles, spent all his wealth on his subjects, thus making him very popular with the local Muslim and Christian populace of Bithynia.
Hey, there you go. That's a way to make yourself popular. I think it's also, related to what I just said, a testament to the way of life. This is not yet some grand sedentary empire. This is a nomadic group of people that, this family essentially, that through their rule is slowly becoming this grand sedentary empire. But that way of life, that nomadic way of life, still very much exists. And also, a note, they said he was popular among his Muslim and Christian subjects. This is an expanding state, an expanding empire. It's not looking to slaughter everyone it comes across. I mean, sometimes that occurs, right? There is intense brutality in the history of the Ottoman Empire, but they're looking to effectively rule over the people they conquer, right? They don't want to totally alienate them. And it's not like they're coming across a populace that's satisfied with things the way they are, right? I mean, Byzantine authority has essentially completely collapsed in the region. So these remaining Eastern Roman cities, they can't really call on the Byzantine Empire for help. They are surrounded by all of these different aggressive states. So, like I said, they may even be a little receptive to new leadership, to put it that way. If the Ottoman state comes in and it's willing to be conciliatory, then these people, they've got no one else to turn to, especially if the leader of this state is very generous. They might not be too unhappy to sort of continue as they were, continue living life just under a new state apparatus.
In the centuries after his death, Osman Gazi would be regarded as the ideal sultan, in which all future Ottoman sultans tried to replicate his reputation as a brave and just leader. Every Ottoman leader from then onwards would carry the Sword of Osman during their enthronement ceremony, as a way to proclaim their reign to be noble and just like the humble founder of the empire.
Yeah, though of course, like with many founders, the empire would change so much over time that I think it became more and more difficult to emulate Osman Gazi, to be that humble and noble warrior, when being sultan meant ruling over this massive and populous territory. You had a lot more responsibilities and a lot more power at your fingertips than, say, Osman did. But that's the case with, you can look at, I don't know, first sound popped in my head is someone like a George Washington, right? He's sort of the ideal American president, but the post of American presidency today is very different than it was under George Washington. So, like I said, that's the same with many institutions. The Sultan, the position of Sultan, very different under Osman Gazi than it was in, a couple, even 200 years in the future.
Upon the conquest of Prusa, Osman's body would be laid to rest within the walls of the city, a wish that he made to his son Orhan during the beginning of the siege. After its capture, Prusa, thereafter known as Bursa, became the new capital of the Ottoman Beylik. Shortly after this, an issue of succession sprung up between the two sons of Osman. According to a more traditional rendering of events, the more martially experienced Orhan and more diplomatically inclined Alaeddin agreed on a political agreement in which the former would become the new Bey of the Ottomans, while the latter would be given the new political position of Grand Vizier. This political partnership would prove vital for future Ottoman statecraft, as when Orhan was off on military campaigns conquering new lands, Aledin would oversee running the daily domestic matters of the state from Bursa. In the few years after—
Interesting. I mean, the Ottoman Empire at its height, there's one person in charge, the Sultan. But, the Vizier, the Grand Vizier, is a very important position in governance and politics. That's someone who really often ran the day-to-day affairs of the state. So, I think that dynamic, it didn't necessarily survive in that form, but in one way or another, that dynamic did survive throughout Ottoman history.
After the conquest of Bursa, the new leader of the Ottomans would launch a military campaign into Byzantine Bithynia, reaching as far as the village of Idos, thereby cutting off Constantinople from the major city of Nicomedia.
Yeah.
By 1328, Nicaea would once again be put under a siege, led by Orhan and his eldest son, Suleiman Pasha. That same year, the 7-year Byzantine civil war would end, and a new emperor, Andronikos III, would unite the Byzantine realm after defeating his grandfather and forcing him to retire to a monastery. The new and untested emperor would start his reign off by ordering an official imperial campaign to retake lost lands in Bithynia and relieve the blockade of Nicaea.
Alright, here we go. The Byzantines, whenever they actually sent out an army to conquer some territory, that's how you knew they meant business, right? This was a big empire with a lot of resources, yes, but was often stretched pretty thin. They often called on allies or mercenaries to do their work for them. So, if you've got the Ottomans sending out an actual army, you know it's serious. Now, that did not necessarily mean they would succeed, but it meant they actually really intended on taking this territory back.
With the support of his grand domestic and close friend, John Kantakouzenos, Andronikos III was able to fund and muster around 4,000 infantry for his new Grand Anatolian campaign.
That might not sound like a lot to many of you, but guys, it is 1328. We've already talked about how the Byzantine Empire was stretched thin, much diminished. That's probably about the best he could muster at that time, Yeah, sure, go backwards a couple hundred years and the Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire can muster tens of thousands of troops at the drop of a hat, but that time is far gone. This is an era, if you look at a lot of the European states, actually, in the Middle Ages, when a couple thousand troops is sort of the best a lot of them could do.
The plan for the first portion of the campaign was for imperial forces to cross into Anatolia via the Bosporus, force march to Nicomedia, resupply and gather more forces in that city, then march on Nicaea to lift the Ottoman blockade. If all went well and Nicaea was relieved from Ottoman forces, the emperor would then conduct the slow process of pushing back the Ottomans from Bithynia and re-establishing Byzantine rule in the region.
Right, because, these are the two important cities in the region to the Byzantines and to the Ottomans, right? They want to conquer them. So if you can reconquer these two cities, you have a good chance of reconquering a lot of this territory. Because remember, this is something we have to remember when we look at maps, especially maps from this period. All this territory is painted green right now. But did the Ottomans really control all of this territory? Well, not really. What they did control was sort of these towns, these centers. Some of them would have been garrisoned pretty strongly, some of them not so much. And so, really, if you take control of the population centers in a region, the process of conquering that region happens a lot more easily. It's not like you have to send troops out to every residence, right? Once you take over the population center, things kind of flow naturally, right? So, once again, just remember, even though all of this is colored green, the Ottomans didn't truly, practically control every inch of this territory. That's not how it worked.
As the Byzantines were preparing for their crossing to Anatolia, Orhan, who was still personally leading the blockade on Nicaea, heard the news of the incoming Byzantine military campaign and withdrew most of his besieging forces to meet the Byzantine host before they could regroup in Nicomedia. In the June of 1329, Andronikos III and his army would cross into Anatolia. However, after only 3 days of marching along the shore of the Gulf of Nicomedia, the imperial forces would meet an Ottoman host of 8,000, led by Orhan himself, near modern-day Maltepe, blocking the main road to Nicomedia. With the Ottomans being stationed on a nearby hill and having twice the manpower compared to his imperial forces, conditions were far from favourable for Andronikos III. However, on the 10th of June, the Byzantine emperor would challenge the Ottoman host by deploying his men for battle just below the main Ottoman hill. As the Byzantine army was deploying for battle, 300 Ottoman mounted archers rode down the hill, beginning to harass the Byzantines with arrow fire. Being undeterred by the missiles from above, imperial forces made their way up the hill in a tight formation, even managing to drive back 2 waves of Ottoman assaults down the hill. As day turned into night, and seeing that Ottoman assaults down the hill were not ceasing anytime soon, the Byzantine army began to withdraw back to their camp in order to conduct an orderly retreat in the morning back to Constantinople. However, during this withdrawal, Ottoman cavalry had managed to position itself at the rear of the Byzantine army.
You can also see, before this happens, the composition of the armies. Of course, the Ottoman army is about twice as large, but if we look at composition by percentage, the Byzantine force is primarily infantry with some cavalry, whereas the Ottoman force, I don't know the exact numbers, but that is a much more even split. They proportionally had a lot more cavalry, and of course, earlier in the video, I talked about sort of that, Ottoman or Turkic style of warfare, which was very focused around warfare on horseback, whether through, archers on horseback or, more sort of traditional style cavalry or whatever. It was very cavalry focused.
And proceeded to charge at the now exposed flanks of the imperial bodyguard of Andronikos III, thus wounding the emperor. As panic arose within the Byzantine ranks due to the unexpected attack, the rumor of the emperor being slain on the battlefield began to be spread around by the rank-and-file men of the Byzantine army, an army that was starting to lose its battle cohesion after being exhausted by multiple hours of combat with Orhan's host. As Andronikos III was stretchered off the battlefield alongside his imperial entourage, the morale-depleted Byzantine army scattered in the plain below the main Ottoman hill. Throughout the night into the following morning, Ottoman Akinji horsemen picked off the remaining routing imperial forces, thus ending the engagement in an Ottoman victory. The battle,
well, that went pretty terribly for the Byzantines.
Peloponneson would be the first direct encounter between the heads of state of the Byzantine and Ottoman empires. With the Byzantine relief army being destroyed during the battle, Nicomedia and Nicaea were on their own against Orhan and his besieging forces. After Peloponneson, Andronikos III would officially declare a policy of containment when it came to the Turks of Anatolia, thus ending more than 1,000 years of the Roman military presence in Anatolia. Within 3 years of the battle, Nicaea would surrender to Orhan, and Nicomedia would follow soon after.
Yeah, containment. Maybe a little late to the punch, because you have essentially entirely lost Anatolia at this point. Sort of an essential realm of your empire, the Byzantine Empire, is completely gone.
In 1337, a vast majority of Bithynia was now under Ottoman control, with the exception of a few villages and settlements alongside the Bosporus Strait. While Orhan was out conquering towns and cities for the Ottoman Beylik, Alaeddin Pasha, from the new capital of Bursa, began a series of political and military reforms in order to better legitimize Ottoman power in the region. The Grand Vizier would first establish an Ottoman monetary system in which silver coins were stamped with Orhan's name, thus legitimizing the Ottoman Bey as a proper Turkic ruler in the region.
Hey, that's how you know you're really become a sedentary empire. You're now minting your own currency. That's classic empire stuff.
Secondly, a new imperial dress code was adopted for governmental and military workers within the Beylik, as a way to emulate the Seljuk royal court of old. Lastly, a standing army of salaried soldiers was established in the form of the Yaya and Muslim military corps. However, many Muslim Turkomans still preferred being granted land fiefdoms, called timars, by the Ottoman government instead. No doubt, Alaeddin Pasha had many more reforms planned, but sometime during the conclusion of the Siege of Nicaea, he would fall ill and die in Bursa after years of loyally serving as his brother's right-hand man. Back in the Byzantine Empire, the military and political situation would only get worse, as Andronikos III would be sucked into a three-way struggle in the Balkans between the Second Bulgarian Empire and the emerging powerhouse that was the Kingdom of Serbia.
Yeah, one time, it's been a while since the Eastern Roman Empire was sort of the uncontested master of the Balkans. At one time, the Bulgarians were the up-and-coming power. Looked like they'd be number one. Now, they never truly displaced the Byzantines entirely, but they certainly took a lot of their territory. But now, the up-and-coming power is this medieval Serbian Empire, which, is doing its own rising through the ranks, claiming a lot of territory and power.
During these inter-Christian conflicts in the summer of 1341, Andronikos III would suddenly fall ill with malaria and die, leaving the imperial throne to his 9-year-old son, John V Palaiologos. A regency was immediately established between the former emperor's confidant, John Kantakouzenos, Empress Dowager Anna of Savoy, and ecumenical patriarch John XIV Kalekes of Constantinople. However, when Kantakouzenos left the capital to fend off a Serbian invasion in the Balkans, the latter two regents would conduct a palace coup,
of course,
and named Kantakouzenos and his supporters as enemies of the state. What followed was a 6-year bloody civil war.
See, sometimes you gotta leave the capital to fend off enemy invaders, but you really can't leave the capital, because you're gonna be overthrown the second you go, and now we have another Byzantine civil war. Once again, just very frequent for this time period, and a lot of Byzantine history. Said this earlier, they could really be their own worst enemies. They were fighting so many foes on their borders, but they couldn't stop fighting themselves.
Which would see Byzantine society fracture in two, as the urban populace of the empire supported John V, while the rural lands supported Kantakouzenos. Having lost all support in the major cities of Thrace, with the exception of Didymateiko and desertions plaguing his armies, Kantakouzenos would turn to the Turks of Anatolia to bolster his ranks. The Byzantine magnate would first employ the services of Amur the Lion of the Idanids. However, the Turkic warlord would withdraw from the civil war when Crusader forces from Europe invaded his Beylik in 1343. Kantakouzenos would then turn to the Ottoman and Saracen Beyliks for assistance, even offering the Ottoman Bey his eldest daughter's hand in marriage to solidify the alliance between their two states. Accepting the offer in a lavish ceremony in the town of Salimbria, Orhan Gazi and Theodora Kantakouzene would be married in front of Kantakouzenos' family, thus making the Bey of the Ottomans the son-in-law to the Byzantine magnate. With the marriage solidified and a couple of thousand Ottoman soldiers being ferried into Byzantine Thrace, Kantakouzenos would effectively change the tides of the war in his favor.
And by the way, here we have the start of a sort of complicated Ottoman-Byzantine relationship. So far, the relationship has essentially been the Ottomans conquering more and more Byzantine territory. But now, the Byzantines, or at least one Byzantine, has employed them to help and actually invited them in to Eastern Roman territory, right? The Ottomans have been ferried over not to conquer the territory, but actually to help. Now, like I said, this is a complicated relationship because over time they will conquer that territory, but the Ottoman-Byzantine relationship wasn't always one of pure antagonism. At times they would collaborate, different Byzantine leaders would collaborate with the Ottomans, right? Because the Byzantine Empire had so much infighting that there might be two competing Byzantine leaders who both wanted to claim the throne, and you might side with one of them and oppose the other. So, like I said, a good way to put it is the relationship between the two could be complicated. It wasn't always pure antagonism, though we know in the long run the Ottomans will conquer all of this Byzantine territory.
By 1347, he would seize Constantinople and proclaim himself as senior co-emperor to John V. Even though the civil war was now over, Byzantine territory in the Balkans had been carved up severely by the newly formed Serbian Empire.
Look at that powerhouse! And of course, this era of medieval history is one that is remembered very fondly by a lot of these Balkan states today. This type of history is one, a lot of countries, all countries will teach history in their own nationalistic way, right? They'll first and foremost teach about themselves and then other things. And a lot of countries have particular time periods that they are particularly proud of and fond of. For Serbia, I think this era of the Middle Ages is one that they are particularly fond of. They like to remember the power of their medieval state and how they fought off their enemies, and later on how they at least attempted to resist the Ottomans. So yeah, this is a time period in history that I know a lot of Serbs are very fond of.
Under Emperor Stefan Uroš IV Dušan and the Second Bulgarian Empire. In addition to major territorial losses, the Byzantine countryside of Thrace was thoroughly pillaged by Turkic mercenary soldiers during the war, leaving the empire in a state of economic and social crisis. While the Byzantine Empire was in disarray, Orhan Gazi, during the year 1345, would take advantage of another neighboring civil war, this time in the Karasid Beylik. A bloody succession war between the sons of the former bey in the region had broke out, leading to an Ottoman military intervention by Orhan and his son Suleiman Pasha on the basis of re-establishing peace within a fellow Muslim nation. However, by the end of—
Sure, just a friendly intervention. We're here as allies because we don't want to see you guys, a fellow Muslim nation, collapse into chaos, right? We're here to help. If you ever hear that line, you should be worried.
The conflict, the sons of the former Karasid Bey would be put under Ottoman house arrest, and the Beylik would be formally annexed into the Ottoman realm a few years later.
Of course.
The large Karasid navy, famous for its piratical exploits on the Aegean and its many talented Turkic soldiers and generals, would now be under the service of Orhan and his successors. Back in the Byzantine Empire, the dual rule between John V Palaiologos and John VI Kantakouzenos had become untenable, as the two rulers and their respective factions butted heads in the governance of the state. With the imperial armies in shambles, domestic economy shattered, and the arrival of the Black Death from Crimea, tensions within Constantinople were at a political boiling point.
Not good.
Gathering up Serbian, Venetian and Genoese fiscal and military support, in 1352, the junior co-emperor of the Byzantines would—
And you saw right there that this is the time when, because the Byzantine Empire was so weak, now we've got the damn Black Death spreading. Those Italian forces are becoming quite influential in the region. Now, I mean, they conquer some territory, but their influence, more than just conquering territory, is often financial in nature. They're snatching up a lot of trade deals. You have a lot of Italians from these different Italian city-states and just states settled in Constantinople. They've got a lot of influence over the government. They really are pulling on the purse strings of the Byzantine Empire. So they have a lot of power in how things go in the region, even if, once again, they are conquering some territory, but even if they're not marching in, they've got financial influence.
Would invade the territories of Kantakouzenos' holdings in Thrace, thus sparking a new round of
Another one!
John VI Kantakouzenos would once again call forth Ottoman support for his war effort. Now in his 70s, Orhan Gazi would entrust Ottoman military operations to his son Suleiman Pasha. A 10,000-strong Ottoman army, consisting of mostly cavalry, would be transported to Thrace.
So once again, the Ottomans have been called in to help! So that relationship between the Byzantines and the Ottomans have been, ferried over as allies again. I mean, at least allies to one of the two potential Byzantine rulers, not as enemies.
Which would result in Kantakouzeni forces defeating the coalition army of John V during the Battle of Didymateiko by the end of the year. After the decisive battle, John VI Kantakouzenos would declare victory against the Palaiologos family, delegitimizing the junior emperor John V in favor of his son Matthew. However, crises would persist as Ottoman forces, led by Suleiman Pasha, began raiding the countryside of Thrace.
Yeah, what if you brought us over into your territory and I don't know, we started raiding a little bit? And what if, now, who could imagine it, what if we just conquered a little bit of territory?
Occupying the fort of Tazimpi in the process. While negotiations for return of the fort were underway, on the night of March 2nd, 1354, the whole coastline of Thrace was devastated by a massive earthquake.
Yep.
Major towns in the region, like Gallipoli, saw their fortifications destroyed and their inhabitants dispersed. Seeing the magnitude of destruction from the Asian side of the Hellespont, Suleiman Pasha would quickly order the construction of rafts to cross over the channel, and gathered a great crowd of Turkic families to get ready to repair and resettle the towns of the Gallipoli Peninsula.
This is sort of an inflection point in Ottoman history, at least the narrative of Ottoman history I've heard. This is a really, really crucial moment in the early expansion of the empire. So the Ottomans, they've got this off and on relationship with the Byzantines. They've actually been invited in as allies more than once to Byzantine territory. This time, Suleiman's been brought in to help them fight. He does a bit of raiding, so this is already key. And then, what really changes things is the earthquake happens. And this gives the Ottomans an opportunity to conquer this territory, not only by raiding, but by rebuilding and resettling some of these destroyed cities. And this really gives them a foothold in the region, in the sort of European side of the Byzantine Empire. And from this point onwards, it's up and up for the Ottoman Empire. So this moment, I want to just emphasize the importance. It's a really important moment for the early expansion of the Ottomans. Now, if this exact moment hadn't happened, the Ottomans probably would have found another way into this region, but this is the way it went, and so this is a crucial inflection point for the Ottomans.
Before long, the first Ottoman families stepped foot into Europe, and the fort at Gallipoli was taken over by a substantial Ottoman garrison. Hearing the news that the Turks had crossed into Europe, in an act of desperation, Kantakouzenos offered Suleiman 4 times the amount of tribute that he'd previously proposed in previous negotiations for Simpi, and for the Ottoman withdrawal from the entire region. However, the Ottoman leader shot back, stating that his troops had merely taken over a number of places that had been deserted by their Greek inhabitants.
I think clearly the Ottomans knew what they had, right? They knew how important, well, maybe they didn't know how important this moment was, but they knew it was important, and they knew that they were conquering some valuable territory that could lead to much more, and so offered this massive tribute. They're like, nah, we're good, we're gonna keep doing what we're doing.
And that Gallipoli had fallen to him by the will of God and not by force.
Because of the earthquake.
Suleiman Pasha, who had by then taken over the
And of course, if you are a religious person, this earthquake must really seem like a godsend. Like, this has given us the opportunity to cross into Europe and take this territory. Of course, what really made this moment was the Ottomans taking advantage of that opportunity, right? I mean, a lot of other powers may not have seized on that, but you've got this expansionist, aggressive, competent state with pretty competent leaders at this point, and I think they saw the opportunity that was available and they seized it.
Ottoman military, after his father's steady retirement from public life, would not honor the formal alliance between Constantinople and Bursa, but instead opted for a more aggressive posture against Kantakouzenos in order to take advantage of the destabilizing Byzantine Empire. By the summer of the same year, Suleiman Pasha would begin his much-awaited military campaign in Byzantine Thrace, capturing the towns of Kesan, Tekirdağ and Kolu in rapid succession. Meanwhile, back in the Byzantine capital, Kantakouzenos' rule became increasingly unpopular due to the Byzantine policy of containing the Turks in Anatolia failing disastrously.
Yeah, it didn't really work, did it?
By the end of the year, the more popular John V Palaiologos would be invited back to the capital to rule as co-emperor to Kantakouzenos, and before long, the latter would retire to a monastery in disgrace. Within 3 years, the last forces of Matthew Kantakouzenos would be defeated in Thrace, thus ending another round of Byzantine civil wars. With Osman and Orhan securing early
Here we go. I was hoping we'd get another map of the region. So if you think back to the beginning of the video, to how much territory the Romans still controlled, I mean, not much compared to their height, but compare that to this, they rule over virtually nothing compared to what they once held. They are now an extremely small empire state. They've had all their Anatolian territory taken, and the Ottomans played a big role in that. And then even their territory in Europe, Bulgaria, but especially in this one, Serbia, have played a big role in eating all of that up. So they're left with a very small chunk of territory here. And of course, they still hold on to Constantinople, the city at the center of it all, but they have been very much diminished from even what we saw at the beginning of this video, which was only a few decades prior.
Victories against the Byzantines and capitalizing on the political divisions of their neighbors, the Ottoman Beylik had become one of the foremost rising stars of Anatolia. In the next episode, we will explore the Ottomans.
Yeah, well, I mean, they've taken, first of all, they've conquered a lot of territory in Anatolia, but they've done something pretty special, which is they've made the jump into Europe. So now they're conquering territory on both sides of Constantinople, slowly encircling the city. I wonder where that will go. We've still got a bit, until we get to that, but they are sort of outpacing a lot of their regional rivals.
Sudden and deep expansion into the Balkans, and how Europe responded to these swift land acquisitions by the rising Muslim power. So make sure to subscribe and press the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting, and sharing. It helps us immensely.
Alrighty.
Our videos would be...
And please leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Yeah, that was a good one. I always enjoy me a bit of Ottoman history, and I know some of you guys have really been wanting this one, so I hope you enjoy it. Yeah, Rise of the Ottoman Empire. Fascinating. You've got a lot of regional power players. This is a very complicated era with a lot going on, a lot of different influences and powers at play. Of course, eventually the Ottomans will take out a lot of those powers, conquering the entire region, but, like I said, we're not quite there yet. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Once again, if you did, please leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. I hope you all are having a good day today, and I'll see you all again next time. Goodbye.